Let's blow some shit up as per usual.
Let's do it.
What's your question?
You already know. We're already going into it. Okay, so my question comes from maybe a little bit of our topic today. There's no pause on impact. But my question for you is, when is a time that you thought you were making a really positive impact and actually you fucked it up?
It's a great question. I'd love it if I was prepared for these, but you won't let me do that. So I'm going to process this in real time.
Which I love.
Let's think about that. When is a time that I thought I was making an impact?
Positive impact. But
positive impact. Right. Well, the first thing that comes to mind, this is maybe a little bit of a sidestep from your question, but it was something we were talking about just yesterday. There was a time in one of the first businesses I owned where I made the decision to go with this big PR firm because I thought that was going to like fast track things, and I thought that was I thought it was where we needed to be, and I thought the timing was right, and I thought that was going to make a really positive impact for like our customer experience, for the business. And ultimately, we were not ready for that. Long story short, I just like squandered that opportunity. It never went anywhere because we didn't have right product market fit. We didn't do customer discovery in a way that we should have ahead of time. We didn't have a firm grasp on like the real pain point we were solving. And so really it's just a bunch of wasted money and time. And so from an impact perspective, I mean, that dramatically impacted the how I thought that was going to play out. So I thought I was going to have a really positive impact, right? Like I thought that was going to be really beneficial for the business and my team. I thought it was going to be really beneficial for the customers, but I made that decision from the wrong place. I made that decision not from a place of impact, but from a place of really wanting to just kind of like cruise through some work that I needed to do. I thought that would have, I now realize that I saw that as like an easy button for where I was at kind of in business and for myself as a leader. And instead of like leaning in and doing the hard work and like asking the hard questions and really like getting my hands dirty, I thought that it would be easier to just step back and be like, oh, I can just do this instead, and essentially throw money at it instead of actually trying to like do the work that I needed to do. So in that regard, it was not impactful, and it was super frustrating for me. It ended up being massively more stressful than just doing the work would have been to start with. Mm-hmm. And I think about that a lot now, actually, when I'm just questioning my involvement in my work of like, am I trying to like sidestep this? Is this coming from a place of like clear, concise decision making from a place of impact, or am I just don't want to do it and I'm trying to find some easy out? And honestly, as much as I hate to admit it, like I probably, I have those situations a fair amount where I'm like if I'm being honest, like I'm just trying to not do it. I would like to just find an easier way, but as we know, like it's just not really an opportunity that we get a lot of times, or a decision we should make from a leadership perspective, right? The truth of the matter is we just need to lean in and like do the right work. And a lot of times the right work is the hard work, but it's also the most meaningful and impactful work. So does that answer your question? Did I get it?
That's a great example. And like easy is cheap, right? Like we talk about that a lot. Like the cheap thing never pans out. Typically, if you're trying to like do it for the cheap reason, and easy is cheap. And I think it's funny. I almost wore my shirt today that said, I haven't worn it yet because it's a little bit blunt, but it says nobody cares, work harder. I figured you'd wear that. I'm going to wear it next week. We're together.
Yeah.
Like the hard thing usually pays off because it's not cheap, and like there's intention and connection there. So I think that's a great example. Thanks for being vulnerable.
Yeah, I have a flag in my gym that says trust hard work, and I think they're like, I like I find myself, using that as a real mantra, because I think, to your point, it often doesn't serve us to take the route that is less impactful or less meaningful, right? Because like you get what you put in, and if you don't put in much and you try to sidestep that, like you're going to get out of that the same result. So we're talking about no pause on impact. This is something that you and I talk about a lot, and you always say the kind of encapsulation of that is you're not making an impact. You're either making a positive one or you're making a negative one, and so you get to decide which one you're making. And we think that a lot of times that's not the case. We think that we can kind of pull back and press pause on impact. But the fact of the matter is that not making a decision is a decision in and of itself. And so we can either decide to make one that is in alignment with a positive impact or not. So we are dedicated in this podcast to being tactical and providing real, no bullshit guidance for folks that are trying to move the needle. So let's dive into that. What is that? Where do people start when we talk about making an impact and recognizing if it's positive or negative, and what shift do we make to get ourselves in the right direction?
Well, I think it's the name of this podcast and the name of our company. Like when we named Impact Initiative, it is literally this concept of there's no pause on impact. You are always making a positive or a negative impact. And the fact of the matter is most people are not impact minded, hence our name of our podcast. Therefore, we just make decisions without thinking it all the way down the line. And so when we're thinking about impact, most of the time, most humans don't stop and go, okay, I'm going to make this decision and it's going to impact my family. It's going to impact my business. It's going to impact my health. It's going to impact all of these things. But the question is not if it will impact it. The question is, how will it impact it? So if you just stop for literally 5 seconds, you're going to make a decision. You're going to hire a marketing team. You're going to choose to not go to the gym. You're going to choose to go to the gym. Like, my husband and I have been having this conversation. Like, do we change when we're working out? Like, our kids are back in school. There's more things on our plate this year. Do we change when we go to the gym? Like, how can we have to shift that? And I'm like, well, we could go at night. And we had to stop and think, okay, so if we go at night, this is the impact on our family. If we go at night, this is the impact on our health. Like, is it a positive or a negative? And we literally just sat down and wrote out all of the positives and all of the negatives. And we looked at our ripple of influence, which I think we've already talked about here. And looked at all the people that this small decision, right, is really not that big of a decision. Do we go at 4 a.m? Do we go at 5 p.m? Like, it's not that big of a decision. But it does have a big impact on a lot of people and on our sleep and our health and all of these different things. And so I think it just starts with intentionality and thinking through how it impacts everybody. Is it positive? Is it negative? And how do you weigh those? That's really where it starts for us. And we do that a lot of times. You'll hire a marketing firm and you don't think about, or you'll put an ad to hire someone new in your company. Have you thought through and communicated with your team, or are they seeing that before they have heard it from you online? That was something that just happened to one of our clients. They decided to hire someone, which they needed to. They actually lost 2 people with that post because they didn't communicate it clearly to the team, and they thought that the team thought that they were being replaced. It could have changed everything. Just stopping, thinking about how that post could have impacted people. And they're like, well, they were looking. I'm like, maybe not. But if so, they were looking, and you should have that conversation with them to talk about how you value them before they saw the post and felt unvalued. So I think that it just starts with that. It's simply stopping, taking a pause, and thinking about how your decisions are going to impact not just your life, but the people around you. So I think that's where it starts. And that's where we encourage our clients from. Taylor, any other thoughts on that? Like, what are the next steps after that? Like, how do you make the decision once you figured out the impact, or like the negative and positive? How do you weigh that information? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it brings up a few really important things for me. One, just to back up a half step, is the communication piece. And I found myself talking about this a lot lately. It's something in the water or the air or whatever. And this is like over several countries and different people and different jobs and things. And the fact of the matter is that the only thing that we can really control is how we communicate, right? Like it is literally how we show up in the world, is how we communicate with ourselves, how we communicate with others. And I think that it is the most valuable thing that we can continue to refine and work on, is our ability to be effective communicators and understand how that has a dramatic impact on what we're getting back in the world, right? So when we are not having the impact that we want to have, right? So let's imagine that you're just having a shitty week and you're like, man, it's not landing. My team is X and this is that and the project and I want you to take a second and just look inward and be like, am I communicating in alignment with the impact that I would like to be making and what I would like to be getting back? Because what I found is when things are flowing back to us that are frustrating or not in alignment, or we feel like it's not landing, which I feel like is kind of the word I use for like sometimes as a catch-all for when I'm not making the impact that I want to make. 99% of the time it's because I'm not communicating in alignment with that impact, right? I'm not putting out in the world what I would like to be getting back, or the information required, or the resources, or whatever. And so that's the first place that I've really worked to look, and the first place that I want to start. It's like, okay, this isn't going well, or it's not going how I wanted it to, or it doesn't feel like I wanted it to feel. Let's start with me, right? And I think from a leadership perspective, this is a really this has been like a massive shift for me, and I think it's a place where when we are, again, like I'll also take a half step back before we dive into this piece. Remember that leadership is about being in service of others, right? And management is about telling people what to do. So let's first recognize that, like, when we are interested in true leadership, it is our responsibility to show up in a way that is in service of others, meaning that it provides the space and the opportunity for those people that we are in service of to truly grow and truly reach their full potential. So the only way that we can do that is to communicate effectively. And then if we make that shift, if we all get on the same page and we decide that that is what true leadership is, then when we check ourselves, what it allows us to do, I think, is to really understand like how to connect with individuals and like how to set others up for success. Because it's super easy to let that be flipped in the other direction and just be pissed off at people, right? Like, oh, such and such isn't doing their job, or, oh, whatever, she can't get it right, or he needs, maybe, right? But until we know for a fact that we've communicated in alignment with our expectations and in alignment with the impact that we want to make on that individual, or the project that individual is working on, or the thing that individual needs to put out in the world on our behalf and our company's behalf, we don't get to be frustrated, right? Now, it might still happen, but I think that there's a shift there that can actually alleviate a lot of that frustration when we work on communication. And this is like, I feel like, and you've been on a lot of these conversations with like on the client facing side, where we're like, yeah, maybe, right? Like that could be true. That person might suck. But like you don't get to, I mean, the end result of that, right, would be like to fire someone. I believe that we don't get to do that until we've held up our end of the deal, right? Which is recognizing that we are either making a positive impact on that person in this particular situation, or a negative impact. And I think that really starts with communication. And like, are we putting out what we need to be putting out from a communication perspective so that we get back what's in alignment with our expectations for that individual or for this team, or you could extrapolate that across any area of our businesses. So give me a specific example for you of when you've when you've recognized that you're not making a positive impact, you've shifted, and what did that create? Like, what was the ripple that shift into recognition create for you and who you were with, or what you were doing?
I'll use our example this week. Hopefully it's okay because it involves you. But like we were having this
Son of a bitch.
conversation. You're like, God damn it. No, we were having this like really great conversation on Friday. And like, let me back up. Taylor does not always communicate what he needs. He's just like a powerhouse and just like takes the weight of the team and just like goes. So part of my job, I feel like sometimes, is just to understand, and I do it too. We do, like, I think we both kind of are crappy about this. We're just communicating what we need. But I feel like sometimes I'm trying to figure out what support Taylor needs. But I realized in this conversation, we're having this great conversation about our goals and what we wanted and where we want to go. And part of that is like understanding that like there's some things not working, and you had communicated like, hey, like these things are feeling hard. Like I'm feeling like I'm not doing fully what I want. And I was like, thinking through that. And realizing like this weekend, very recently, like I like looked at that and I was like, oh, like how can we solve for that? And then I had to look at it and go, oh yeah, like by trusting him so much, which I thought was good, I'm not actually showing up in a way that's authentic to me, and how I would typically do that. And it's amazing. Like this week, I have felt so much more productive because I have reconnected and taken more ownership. And like just some of the tasks, I'm like, Taylor's got it. He's operations. It's good. And you're like, I'm drowning with operations. I don't love this. And I'm like, okay. And so it just was like this moment. And like on Monday in our conversation or whenever we talk, like I apologized. I was like, hey, this actually wasn't it. This was not our best communication. I'm not showing up fully in our team. I'm trusting, but it's not actually trust. It's just actually complacency. And so I think there's ownership in that. And there's communicating that like you fucked it up and you weren't, it wasn't intentional. Like I wasn't like, I don't want to do these things. And, we joke about that I'm like the vision fairy and I just get to go like with my little vision wand and live my best life. But in all actuality, like I really love being a part of the details. I'm very, like things matter, words matter, and all of these little things that I was just letting you handle, I wasn't really showing up fully. And so I think it really does start with communication of like, hey, I realize that and I could do better, and communicating that. I think that vulnerability helps. I mean, I don't know what it felt like to you, but for me, just communicating that and realizing that and taking the ownership, already I feel like a different person this week. Like I feel like I am more engaged. I feel like I'm more on top of everything. And it's a dance. Like you don't always have the ability to step away or have that space or have that level of support, or at least I haven't. So I think we've had to figure it out with running companies together, right? Like we've had to figure out our dance, and I think communication is so important in that. Like you communicating that something was feeling slightly off allowed me to actually take responsibility and then take ownership in that moment and then make the change. Like I always say, people like to say sorry, but sorry actually means like comes from an apology comes from the word repent. And so if you're actually going to repent, it means turn from your ways. You have to actually not do that thing again. And I think that's the thing that we forget about apologizing, is you have to do something different. To say I'm sorry and then continue to do the same thing, you're not actually sorry. And so I had to look at that and go, what would it look like if I actually shifted this conversation? So yeah, hopefully that was okay. I just shared all of our stuff on our podcast. There you go.
Classic. No, I mean, I think that's a good actually point, or just reminder that it is also very much with our peers, right? Like I was giving an example, and in terms of some of the frustrations that people often have, like with their teams, i.e. people that they are, again, in service of or work for you as a leader. But that can also very much come and should come from people that we are, peers with. And we call that like your three, right? We talk about the ripple of influence. Like that's your inner circle. Like there's a handful of those people where support is reciprocal and you get as much back from that person as you give. That's one way to kind of classify this inner circle. Mm-hmm. There's other ways, but I think that impact piece is actually something, it is now I'm like processing in real time that we take that for granted too a lot of times, right? Like mm-hmm. I'll use another example, which I think is very common. It's like your partner, right? Where you're like, well, yeah, this person, I'm building a life with them, or I share a life with them, we're in the same house. And that you get kind of lazy with that sometimes, right? Like specifically on the communication side of things, on like the positive or negative impact. And I think it's a good reminder to make sure that you are as critical of those relationships in terms of like checking yourself and making sure like, am I showing up well? Am I, because we have a responsibility to our those people in a very, very real way, right? And I think that sometimes those people actually can get the raw end of the deal because we're so focused on the other kind of rings of our circle, right? As our ripple goes out in the world and we have our team and we have our, all the people that we're talking to and responsible for. And I think for myself, it can be hard to balance that, right? Like you pour out for these other people, and that's kind of the nature of these relationships is you don't get as much back as you get further away from your inner circle. You're giving more than you're getting. They're not going to support you in the same way. And this ties into like, positive or negative impact is like, we're very responsible for these individuals in terms of making a positive impact on their life. And as we describe that ripple of influence, we're moving closer and closer to our legacy. So it's our responsibility to like put out into the world something that is impactful or will impact others so that we're creating that legacy. But as we pull back and we get closer to our home base and closer to our inner circle, those people can kind of get the raw end of the deal sometimes, right? Because we're like, it takes a lot of effort to create legacy. And so I think, that's a good reminder. I'm actually, as much as I hate, sharing about myself, I'm glad that you shared that. Because I think it is a good reminder to make sure that you are equally as connected to that impact that you're making on the people that you work most closely with or live most closely with. Because when it's not right there, it also impacts everything else. Right. Like I know for me, like the weeks that I've been like, oh man, it just feels like I'm having like a shitty week at work. Like it doesn't feel, sometimes that's because like I'm not communicating effectively with my wife. Right. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, like we're actually missing each other. And that's even like, you don't have to be fighting or like arguing, but you're just like, it's just off. Right. Mm-hmm. And that is like, it's a very great example, I think, of you're not doing anything intentionally in terms of like, you didn't get mad at each other, but you're also making a negative impact. Right. Like it's either positive or negative. And so it's this very like fine line of being very intentional about the positive impact side of things, because when it is negative, it also ripples out. Right. Yep. I think we can spend a lot of time in the negative space without recognizing it. And that just fucks up our legacy. Right. It ruins, because that starts to impact how we do everything.
I think that's like, I'm glad you brought that point up, because I think that's key when we're looking, I'll go back to what I said earlier, when we're looking at these things and we're creating metrics to understand if it's going to be a positive or a negative. I think so many times we get this question all of the time for leaders, like, how do you know what to prioritize? And I think that's where your core values and having, I call them, because I have like, a kindergarten vocabulary, I call them my main things. Like I have my three main things. And if those three main things are not being met. Because my husband and so many, and not saying that I don't do it because I do it all the time still, and I have to like really make sure that I check myself on this. I always say he can get my leftovers. Like I give everything out that's on my plate, all of my first and my best to everybody else. And my husband and my family just like tends to get my leftovers if I'm not truly thinking through my week and like setting things up and taking ownership. But I think we have to have a good grasp on our core values and our main things, our main priorities. And typically what happens, or if you're like me, we'll be like, oh, well, I'm working. I do this as a mom all the time. Well, I'm working so I can provide for my family. So like I use that to put work first instead of thinking about my legacy that I'm building within my kids through relationships. So many people talk about legacy and they think it's just money. Oh, it's my inheritance. Yeah, you might be giving them money, but if you're giving them money and you didn't give them love and the things that truly matter and the things that actually build the internal part of people, your legacy, your inheritance, your financial inheritance is not going to mean anything. And I think so many times we miss the ball. We're like so legacy forward or focused that what happens is if we're even a degree off, if you think about shooting an arrow, if you're shooting an arrow, a mile, we'll say a mile. I know that's impossible. But if we're shooting in a mile and we're off just by a degree, we just have our focus just slightly off, that is not hitting the target. And it is our job and our legacy to hit the bullseye of our vision. And if we're a degree off, you're not even hitting that target a mile down the road. So your legacy, if you're not starting at home and your house isn't in order and your main things are not aligned with your core values, you're going to be totally off 20 years out, 10 years out, 5 years out. You're not even going to be on target at all. You're sure as hell not hitting the bullseye. And I think we get those things so twisted because we're like, oh, we have to make money. And I'm like, there's a lot of ways to make money. If that's your main thing, then you probably need to rethink yourself because money is actually the effect. It's a symptom of making a really positive impact. So I'm glad you brought that up, Taylor, because I think that is a very big part of talking about there's no pause on impact. And when we're focused on some of the things like money, we're really going to screw it up. It's not going to work for us, a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road.
Love that. Yeah, it's a great tie into the financial piece. Like it like further highlights the ripple is that like when we are doing things that are impactful, when we are making decisions in service of a positive impact versus negative, like it does truly impact everything. And like you will make more money, and it will be a hell of a lot more enjoyable making that money than nose to the grindstone, like doing it from a place of like pushing through and not paying attention to these things. So it feels like a great mic drop place to end. As always, impactinitiative.network for more information. You can check out everything that Christine and I are up to and our amazing team. And last but not least, rate this podcast. We're just a few episodes in. We would love it if you take a second to rate this on your favorite platform. Subscribe. We are going to release an episode every Friday. So subscribe so you can be alerted and not miss any of the content that we have coming your way, and share it with your friends. So if you are anyone you know that is in a leadership position, runs a team, CEO, entrepreneur, if any of this content resonates with you and you think that it would connect with someone else, we would be grateful if you could forward this to a friend and help us expand our audience as we get started. So thanks for all of our early supporters. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next Friday on Impact Minded.